1,000 feet above Central Texas, en route to the Kennedy Space Center for a landing. No communications have been received with the spacecraft since. No tracking data of objects of any kind reported.
Again, that is Mission Control in Houston that we've been listening to.
Flight Director Leroy Kane has declared a contingency. Flight controllers are securing all information and data and notes.
And you've been listening live to Mission Control transmissions here in Houston. What we want to do now to update us is go to Eileen Hawley. She is with NASA here in Houston. Again, we are waiting for the landing of Space Shuttle Columbia. It has not been seen since 8 a.m. This is very unusual. Eileen, can you hear us?
Yes, hello.
Okay, Eileen Hawley with NASA. Please give us some perspective right now on what you're dealing with.
Well, we have declared a contingency about 8 o'clock as the orbiter would have been overhead Texas. We lost all communication with it. We lost all of our telemetry. So it is obviously overdue for a landing, and we have declared a contingency.
Eileen, we know that security is especially tight for this landing. Put this into perspective for us. How rare is this?
Well, certainly we've never had a problem on re-entry before. There's no indication that this is a security issue at this point. It's far too early to enter into that kind of speculation.
Okay, so to just reiterate, you again have not seen the shuttle since about 8 a.m., but it was due for landing. Exactly what time?
They were due in for landing at 8:16 this morning, and we lost data about 8 a.m.
Lost about 8 a.m. And what's happening right now as far as efforts to locate it?
There are some well-defined contingency plans. Our Mission Control Center is continuing to look for data to see what we can find, and we will certainly be mobilizing to see what we can do. But again, right now we're just in the very early stages here and just beginning to work our contingency procedures.
Okay, Eileen Hawley with NASA, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now,
thank you.
Just a recap for you, if you are just now joining us live, the crew of Space Shuttle want to rejoin MSNBC's coverage right now.
One can only speculate what has happened, which I will not do, but Jay Barbary did say it must be something on board that space shuttle. Something happened on board that flight because the Space Shuttle Columbia, at that point in its return to Earth, just 17 minutes prior to its scheduled landing, would not have the capability to fire up its engine booster rockets and turn that thing around into outer space again, into above the Earth's atmosphere. It would not be possible for the astronauts to take control of the shuttle that way. Jay also told us that from that point, from 9 a.m. Eastern time until the scheduled landing at 9:17, no doubt that shuttle would have been on an automatic pilot, if you will. It would be completely controlled by mechanics and technology at that point to bring that space shuttle down safely. We are just getting reports here of an explosion in the area of Dallas, Texas. Now, what we are getting this from Jim Cummins, our NBC News bureau chief there in Dallas, once again reporting an explosion in the area of Dallas, Texas. Whether or not this has something to do with the space shuttle or not is another thing, but we will tell you, as reported by the Mission Control headquarters, that that space shuttle was over Texas, high in the sky, 200,000 feet above the Earth's floor here, way up high in the sky over Texas, en route into Cape Canaveral, which was about coming up on 1,200 miles away. But once again, we're hearing reports of an explosion in the area of Dallas, Texas.
You've been listening live to MSNBC's coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia crew not being seen in the air since 8 a.m. It was due for a scheduled landing at 8:16 Houston time. Right now, we would like to join NBC's coverage in progress.
Contact with the Space Shuttle Columbia and Houston Johnson Air Space Center while it was over Texas airspace. The shuttle was making its final approach to land at the Kennedy Space Center. The Columbia is carrying its first Israeli astronaut in space. They were expecting very good weather, and they were wrapping up a 16-day scientific research mission, which included some experiments on animals and ant behavior and bee behavior. Let's break in once again. Jay Barbary is back for us. Jay, what can you tell us?
I just had a report from a friend out in Texas that said that they heard an explosion that shook the windows of their home, and they saw debris coming down, and this was 100 miles north of Dallas.
Yeah, we should add, Jay, that NBC's Jim Cummins, who's based in Dallas, Texas, is also telling us that he's hearing reports. And of course, at this juncture, we should stress to our audience that we have no way of knowing if these indeed are connected, but certainly circumstantially, it's ominous news of an explosion somewhere in the area of Dallas, Texas. You said that, Jay, you're hearing it's about 100 miles from Dallas?
1,500 miles per hour. Again, Columbia has been out of contact with Mission Control since about 8 a.m. this morning. Again, security extra tight because of the Israeli astronaut, the payload specialist Ilan Ramon, on the middle deck of the STS-107, returning home after 16 days in orbit. They conducted 80 experiments. So far, a successful mission, but right now we're waiting for word from Columbia as it tries to contact Mission Control on the way to a scheduled touchdown at 8:16 a.m. this morning in Florida. Again, security extra tight here as one of the astronauts, an Israeli astronaut named Ilan Ramon. Security was extra tight for the landing because of this passenger on the Space Shuttle Columbia. Israeli fighter pilot Ilan Ramon on the middle deck of, he's the payload specialist, one of crew members returning on Space Shuttle Columbia for a scheduled touchdown at 8:16 a.m. this morning. If you're just joining us, you're looking at live pictures from Mission Control in Houston as they track the return of Space Shuttle Columbia. Columbia was headed home this morning, scheduled to touch down in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Columbia returning from more than 2 weeks in space, where the crew completed 80 experiments. Last we heard, though, NASA has declared this an emergency situation. They've pulled out emergency procedures and retained all records.
This is Mission Control Houston. Flight controllers here continue in a contingency, securing information and data from today's Space Shuttle descent of the Shuttle Columbia. Columbia's last communication was received at about 8 a.m. Central Time as Columbia flew 200,000 feet above north central Texas. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted. No communications or tracking of any type was received after 8 a.m. Central Time along Columbia's planned route toward the Kennedy Space Center, toward a landing there this morning that had been planned to take place at 8:16 a.m. Central Time.
Live pictures of Mission Control in Houston as we track the return of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Originally scheduled minutes away from landing. It was scheduled to touch down at 8:16 a.m. this morning, but we have learned now that there is an emergency situation. NASA has declared this an emergency, pulled out emergency procedures, and retained all records. The last known contact with Columbia coming at 8 a.m. this morning as the spacecraft traveled about 200,000 feet above central Texas at a speed of 12,500 miles per hour. The scheduled return of Columbia was for 8:16 a.m.
Again, last communications from the Space Shuttle Columbia were above north central Texas at 8 a.m. Central Time as it descended toward Florida. Any debris that is located in the central Texas area or in that vicinity should be avoided and can be potentially hazardous, and its location should be reported to NASA. Again, flight controllers here in Mission Control have declared a contingency, securing all information and data pertinent to today's descent of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Again, the last communications from Columbia was received at about 8 a.m. Central Time this morning as it descended above north central Texas en route to an 8:16 a.m. planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Any debris that may be found in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or in the vicinity of the last communications that was received with Columbia, again over the north central Texas area, should be avoided and reported to NASA and may be hazardous.
You're looking at live pictures from Mission Control in Houston as we track the return of Space Shuttle Columbia back to Cape Canaveral. With security tighter than usual, Space Shuttle Columbia disappeared over Texas at about 8 a.m. this morning. No tracking data or communication has been received by Mission Control.
Norm?
They run at very high speeds, I think something like 80,000 RPM, and it is possible for, I guess, one to fly apart. However, there are 3 of them, and you can certainly operate with the loss of one, and some of the rockets are used right down to almost the last, just as the shuttle starts to go subsonic. So some of the steering rockets or attitude rockets continue to fire even down close to ground.
Okay, so those steering rockets, how much would they be? They would be used at this juncture then? We're talking about the rockets that are typically used on orbit to maneuver the shuttle. They would be used in the higher altitudes where there's less air passing over the aerodynamic surfaces of the shuttle, correct?
That's correct, and as the shuttle gets lower and lower, I think various of those rockets start to be deselected, and then finally, before the shuttle or right around the time it goes subsonic, none of the rockets are being used anymore.
I see. Let's go through what they call in NASA and what they will undoubtedly begin even as we speak, as they preserve their data, that rather ominous statement coming out of Mission Control, which you will recall, of course, from the Challenger days, the fault tree, where they try to figure out what are they going to be looking at, try to help us prioritize how they would try to sift through this, what's happened here.
I would assume that they all had data up until some moment, and there are various systems in which the failure could have occurred. It could have been in the control system. It could have been a failure in the hydraulics, as you mentioned. So they'll have the experts in the various areas looking at their data to see if they can figure out what happened when.
Norm, you were involved in Challenger and the investigation, were you not?
I played some role in that. I was not on the board that looked at it, but I think most of us in the astronaut office wound up playing some role, and among other things, I was the casualty assistance officer for the Scobie family.
I see. Give me, as we harken back to that as the template for what goes on now, first of all, the first concern is the crew, clearly. Search and rescue possibilities, chances of survivability. Let's run through that. Norm? Have we lost Norm? Norm Thagard? All right, we've lost Norm Thagard. I apologize for that. We'll try to get him back. All right, it'd be nice if we could, if I could prevail upon the control room to bring up some of the pictures of the crew at some point on at least on the computer. And we're working on that right now, and we'll get that for you in just a minute. 7-person crew led by Rick Husband on his second flight. Willie McCool, his first, David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, Michael Anderson, Laurel Clark, and Ilan Ramon, the first Israeli to fly in space. And what we've been seeing, courtesy of WFAA, our affiliate in Dallas, is the unmistakable signs of a vehicle breaking up at an altitude of about 200,000 feet. Let's listen to James Hartsfield, Mission Control Houston, for a minute, if we can.
Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted to the shuttle contingency. Any debris that is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area should be avoided and may be hazardous due to toxic substances used as propellants on the shuttle. Also, debris could be reported to NASA.
All right, there you have it. James Hartsfield, Public Affairs Officer, sitting in the console there in Mission Control in Houston, giving some advice which we'd like you all to heed, please. If you're in that part of Texas and you see some piece of debris from the Space Shuttle Columbia, we invite you to stay away from it. Call the local authorities, please. Barbara Starr with us at the Pentagon, or in Washington anyhow. Barbara, what do you have for us?
Miles, we can now tell you that the Bush administration is about to convene what they call a domestic event conference. This will be an interagency conference between all domestic and military agencies that will be involved in the next step, whatever that may be. We can tell you we've spoken to some Pentagon officials this morning. There is a lot of distress about this situation. They are about to, as we say, to convene a domestic event conference. This is what happens in the federal government when there is a serious domestic event in the country. We can also tell you that there would be every expectation as events unfold here that the North American Aerospace Defense Command in Colorado and the U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha, Nebraska will be involved in whatever the next step is, trying to reconstruct through their satellite and communication systems what may have happened.
To do has gone into a contingency plan and basically is following the procedures in that contingency plan and trying to make any contact that it can with ground forces that can assist us.
Kyle, this is David Bloom in New York. Walk me through this a little bit more slowly, if you would. You lost the sensory data around 9 a.m. You said some of the sensory data around 9 a.m. Eastern time. Then you lost contact with the Challenger. What does that mean for someone who's not an expert in the space shuttles? When you lose sensory data, did you know immediately that something was wrong? What did you lose, and when did you lose complete contact with Columbia?
Well, it was roughly around the same time frame. I guess the shuttle obviously is computer controlled all the way, almost all the way to the ground. And it's not unusual when we have communications dropouts. Sometimes if the shuttle's pointed in a certain direction or something, we might not be able to see its antennas, if you will, from the satellite to communicate with it. So we do have data dropouts. So we did see the data dropouts first, and then shortly thereafter, we did not have any, we can confirm that we did not have any air-to-ground communications. We have an instrumentation officer in Mission Control who can confirm when we have a loss of signal, if you will. So it was a fairly short span of time between those two events.
Okay, and I just want to make sure of two things. Number one, obviously there's been no contact with the Space Shuttle Columbia since that point.
That's correct.
And number two, when you said that you are trying to get in contact with ground forces, tell me what's going on right now in terms of a search, rescue, recovery effort, whatever's going on. And can you tell us, Kyle, if it's at all possible, to pinpoint where this explosion, where the shuttle may have landed? We're hearing the Dallas area. Do you know more precisely?
Well, no, I don't know more precise information than that, David. And I guess I'm not in Mission Control right now, obviously. I'm at the Johnson Space Center, so I can't follow along. I don't have the contingency plan to tell you what the flight control team is doing. But it's obviously a very methodical approach to try to do whatever you can to understand from a recovery standpoint what you could do. Remember that this happened at an altitude above 200,000 feet, so where the loss of signal is and where any contact with the ground would occur would be a fair distance. So I couldn't tell you anything about. We're not hearing any official reports directly from anyone in the Dallas area or anywhere, but we do know where we lost communications with the vehicle, so that would just be speculation in terms of where, on my part at least, where debris would be hitting the ground.
Kyle, and for people who are just joining us, we should say we're talking to Kyle Herring. He's of NASA. He's a spokesperson at Johnson Space Center this morning here on the East Coast. We are getting word that the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs have convened a domestic event conference for any response. Has NASA been in touch with the White House? What are the discussions going on there at this time?
No, I do not know whether upper NASA management have been in contact with the White House at this point.
It brings us, however, to the question of security. Let's talk a little bit about the security procedures before the Columbia took off. I know that across the board for any shuttle flight after 9/11, security was greatly enhanced. But this time, you are talking about an Israeli astronaut on board. Tell me about how security changed, if it changed at all.
Well, Soledad, we really don't talk about the security plans that are in place. I can tell you that I was at the Kennedy Space Center for the launch, and the security measures that were in place were certainly as adequate as they were for any other flight prior to this one. So I do not think there's any correlation at all to who was on board this vehicle at all. It was a standard launch, a standard pre-launch, and then the mission was, a total success. We had no issues at all throughout this mission.
And we should mention that we've been looking at some of the pictures of the astronauts on board the Columbia. And Kyle, I'm going to ask you to stand by for us, if I may. We're going to hand it back over to David, who has got someone from the White House on the line.
Kyle, thank you very much. Rosalind Jordan, one of our NBC correspondents at the White House, is there right now. Rosalind, has there been any word from the White House? Do we know if the president has been notified? Any official reaction from the White House as yet?
No, David, there's no official reaction as of right now. The president is at Camp David for the weekend, and so when the president is away, it is a little more difficult to get any reaction to anything of this sort. It is probably fair to assume, though, that he has been made aware of it. I don't have official confirmation of that, though. I am awaiting callbacks from various sources inside the administration so we can find out what the official reaction is at this point.
Okay, Rosalind, please stand by, and as soon as you get any official word from the White House, we'll come back to you. Let's turn now to Buzz Aldrin. He, of course, a former astronaut, member of the first Apollo moon landing crew. Buzz, thank you so much for joining us on what appears to be a very sad morning for NASA.
Yes, I'm here.
Buzz, tell me, as you look at this video, which we're watching right now, knowing that NASA has lost contact with the Space Shuttle Columbia, knowing that there's been a large explosion in the Dallas, Texas area, as you see this video, what does it say to you?
I think there's no doubt that we've had a major loss of the challenge of the Space Shuttle Columbia.
And Buzz, I mean, help me understand. I mean, clearly there are a myriad of explanations as to what might have happened, assuming that that's true. As an astronaut, what are the things that you immediately think about?
Well, I think about how Mission Control is trying to do the very best that they can, but they're feeling very frustrated. There just isn't very much that one can do except wait for further reports from the observers around the country who might be looking for some signs of impact of particles from the shuttle.
Buzz, this is Soledad O'Brien in New York. What we know is that 16 minutes before the scheduled landing, when already the deorbiting was in process and everything seemed to be going fine, they lost radio contact. So from a perspective of an astronaut, tell me what is going on in that 16 minutes before you're touching back on ground from what has been a perfectly uneventful experience in space up to then?
Well, the crew members are very much strapped in as the spacecraft is approaching the increasing of G-forces. So they would have their helmets and gloves on for the re-entry, and it'd be just watching the instruments on board the spacecraft that would be indicating there will be a loss of communications normally as the spacecraft enters the plasma shield of re-entry. Evidently, communication was lost prior to that point, and from what I'm seeing on TV broadcasts, there were some sensor dropouts. I think I heard someone say in the hydraulics area prior to the total loss of communication. That might indicate that some abnormality had been occurring with maybe the auxiliary power units that power the control surfaces and, of course, the landing gear and other hydraulically actuated portions of the shuttle's control system.
Buzz, this is David Bloom again. Talk about that a little bit more. Sensor dropouts in the hydraulic area.
Well, I'm just repeating what I heard.
No, I understand.
Probably.
I understand, and we've had the same, NASA official has been telling us the same thing. What I'm asking you is, if that's the case, what's the potential significance of that? Why when you hear that, does that ring alarms?
Well, the control surfaces clearly are needed during the re-entry. Higher up in the atmosphere, or above the atmosphere, reaction control jets control the attitude of the spacecraft, and align it on the proper course, aligned with the incoming direction.
Here that you see, there are several trails coming from this aircraft. And of course, one of our experts here, Dexter Ingram, who is a former Navy pilot, says, of course, this does not look good.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if it broke up at 200,000 feet above the above Texas here, let's listen to what the update is.
The space shuttle has been declared in mission control. Flight controllers here are securing all information, data, and notes pertinent to the descent of the Space Shuttle Columbia this morning from orbit. The last communications were received from the Space Shuttle Columbia at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time, as it was an altitude of about 200,000 feet above north central Texas, en route to a planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted to the Space Shuttle contingency. Any debris that may be located in the Dallas-Fort Worth vicinity should be avoided and may be hazardous due to the toxic nature of propellants used on board the shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities. To repeat, any debris that is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area should be avoided, as it may be hazardous due to toxic substances used as propellant on board the space shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities. This is Mission Control, Houston.
Any moment, we expect to be joined by Buzz Aldrin, astronaut, former astronaut, who will be able to perhaps tell us more about what's going on today. We just heard from NASA updating us. You know, they're not saying that they've lost the Space Shuttle Columbia. They are saying that they are in a contingency mode right now and that they consider this an emergency situation. But obviously, if you've been watching us for the past few minutes, you see the pictures and you see that it looks truly, truly horrifying there. Buzz Aldrin is with us now. Mr. Aldrin, thank you for joining us. What can you tell us from what you've been hearing for the past, 45 minutes now?
Well, I'm afraid I can't tell you very much other than that I got up at 6 o'clock to watch the orbiter reentry. And as soon as I turned in some of the cable networks that were covering the entry, there didn't seem to be much going on. There wasn't much communication.
Are you looking at your television now?
Yes, I am.
And you see the pieces of debris. It looks as if it's pieces of debris over north central Texas.
Yeah, that's very similar to the debris that emanated after the Challenger accident. And of course, for those who were watching the entry, I wasn't fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to have a ticket paid to go out to the South Pacific to see the Mir enter, but those people kind of missed what was happening. But the view is very, very similar, as the main portion of the center of gravity of the shuttle proceeds in its entry path. When other pieces are separated from it for whatever reason, they're all going to follow the same path also, so they're going to be slightly separated, but they'll show traces of entry paths that are, of course, going all in the same direction, and everything is going to re-enter once the deorbit burn is made. Every piece of that, every particle that comprises the shuttle is going to enter the atmosphere. And whether it burns up or not, it'll hit the ground.
Mr. Aldrin, what can you tell us about the safety features of this aircraft? Is there anything, or would there be anything on board in case something like this were to happen, that these astronauts could be jettisoned to safety?
Well, I have a company called Starcraft Boosters, and we have been doing some studies recently for an ejection pod that could be incorporated into the present shuttle fleet. That's quite an expensive and major overhaul. Alternatives to that are ejection seats for the crew, and when the shuttle was first flown, the first flight of Columbia, John Young and Bob Crippen had ejection seats, and those were flown in several of the subsequent shuttle flights for the crew safety to be able to separate the crew from the orbiter. It has been absolutely useless under these conditions. The only thing that could save the crew would be a separable pod that could maintain control. And it just so happens that the last few weeks I've been pursuing verbally suggestions that we should look at the alternative of designing a Shuttle 2, a second-generation Shuttle 2, that would have an ejection pod on it that could save the crew. And that could happen at any time during launch. The ejectable pod could save the crew at any time during launch and throughout the flight. We would design that pod so that it could also be adapted as the crew return or crew rescue vehicle on the space station. It's a plan that I have had in my own mind and discussing with other people as an alternative to be looked at. And I'm sure after the events of today begin to settle down and we understand exactly what happened, there will be an increased movement toward establishing a crew ejectable pod on the space shuttles. Whether they will ever do that for the present orbiters is debatable.
Yeah, our more immediate concern, of course, our immediate concern now is what's happening today. We're talking with the second man to walk on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, who has awakened this morning, as you probably have, to see these horrible images on the screen. This from our sister station, one of our affiliates in Dallas, Fort Worth, WFAA, over north central Texas. We believe that this is debris of the Space Shuttle Columbia, the oldest in the shuttle fleet. Right. We believe that this is an image of it breaking up over Texas.
And in case you're just joining us, NASA has not said that it's lost the space shuttle yet, but they said that they are in an emergency situation, and it seems clear from these pictures that this will not end well. We want to thank Buzz Aldrin for joining us. And now we're joined by Captain Jim Lovell, who is on the line. Mr. Lovell, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Can you tell us what if you've been watching these pictures, what you think is going on at NASA right now?
Well, I think they're assessing the situation. They want to know all the information, look at all the tapes, and try to look at all the data to see exactly what occurred. Obviously, it's a disaster, and they want to make sure that whatever they tell to the media that it's correct as far as they know. It'll take some months before they do an analysis of the breakup and look at the history of the orbiter and look at the conditions of where the breakup started as far as any loads on the vehicle and things like that.
Captain Lovell, we were talking just a little while ago about Apollo 13, talking about the movie, of course. Unfortunately, that's how most of the people in the United States know about the situation with your aircraft. And the concern there was that the spacecraft was going to burn up. And I remember back in the early days of NASA and the space program, that was the huge concern, that the capsule would burn up. Have we alleviated those problems?
Well, you're talking about two different vehicles here. The command module that we had, as long as the explosion didn't disrupt the heat shield behind us, we had a very small, compact capsule going through. Yeah. Of course, we hit the atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour, and the shuttle comes in about 17.5. But it has a large, wider area. It's got wings. It's got a tail section, and all those things that take an effect of just what happened. Now, if the breakup occurred something like 200,000 up, it might be that you have to look at the loads on the vehicle to see just what caused the breakup.
Captain Lovell, we're talking about a shuttle aircraft that's the oldest. Hold on, let's listen in once again to Mission Control.
Has been declared here in Mission Control as a result of the loss of communication with the Space Shuttle Columbia at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time this morning as it was descending toward a landing at the Kennedy Space Center, scheduled to touch down there at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Communications and tracking of the Space Shuttle was lost at 8 a.m. as it was approximately 200,000 feet above the north central Texas area. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted. Any debris that is located in that vicinity that may be related to the space shuttle contingency should be avoided and may be hazardous as a result of toxic propellants that are used on board the space shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities.
For those of you who are just joining us,
controllers here are securing all information and notes and data pertinent to today's descent by the Space Shuttle Columbia. This is Mission Control, Houston.
That was Mission Control in Houston talking about a state of emergency that they have declared on the loss of communication with the Space Shuttle Columbia. That communication was lost around 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The shuttle was scheduled to land around 8:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are on the phone now with former Chief Astronaut and Captain Jim Lovell. Mr. Lovell, this is the oldest aircraft in the fleet here. It was built in 1979. It has a wingspan or a length of 122 feet. Buzz Aldrin was saying that there perhaps needs to be...
As well, we have here a model of the space shuttle that we're looking at, trying to figure out exactly where the insulation came from that we are told broke off from the fuel tank upon takeoff, and according to the reports we're seeing, hit the left wing. But the analysis that we understand took place in Mission Control at that time figured that it had not caused any serious problems. However, there is clearly something that went wrong. Here is the video from this morning, somewhere around 9 o'clock, multiple contrails, eventually as this object coming into the atmosphere apparently begins to break up. It was at a height, we're told, of about 200,000 feet over Texas when NASA and Mission Control lost contact with the Space Shuttle Columbia. You can see there what appear to be more than one sources of contrail, and what appears to be, according to several people, including John Nance, the ABC aviation consultant, what appears to be the breaking up of Space Shuttle Columbia this morning in its attempted landing as it came in over Texas. 7 astronauts on board, 6 Americans and 1 Israeli. The trouble apparently began somewhere before it reached down to 200,000 feet, 40 miles in the air, still virtually in outer space, but within range of these cameras. NASA is sending rescue missions into the area. We understand that residents of North Texas heard a big bang at about the time the Space Shuttle Columbia disappeared on its way to a landing at Cape Canaveral. One man said it was like a car hitting the house or an explosion that shook that much. It's not clear what that might have been. That could have been simply a sonic boom, for example. It's way too soon to conclude in any way what has happened exactly. Columbia is NASA's oldest shuttle, and it first flew in 1981, so more than 20 years, 22 years. We now have a former astronaut, Norm Thagard, with us. Former shuttle astronaut, Norm Thagard. Mr. Thagard, good morning. What can you tell us of what you've seen so far?
Looking at the pictures, unless it's extraordinary circumstance, it appears that the shuttle is broken up on entry.
You've gone through this before many times. What kind of procedures are there inside a shuttle cabin when you begin to have troubles? You've gone through many simulations as well as the real thing. What would the astronauts have been doing when they saw this happening?
You have checklists, both a routine checklist and you have emergency checklist. So you look at what the symptoms are, and based on the things that you see on your meters and your dials and other information, you go to the appropriate procedure and begin to go through those procedures.
What kind of recourse do you have if you realize that something catastrophic has happened to the shuttle around you, and if the cabin is still basically intact? Are you in your pressure suits? Do you have parachutes available? What do you begin to do?
Since the Challenger accident, we have had pressure suits with a parachute, and if it were the case that the crew cabin stayed intact and the G-forces weren't so enormous that that caused harm, then you might have some chance of getting out.
What do you think the odds of survival are from what you've seen on television this morning?
Well, you almost hate to say anything about it since family members probably watch, but you would have to think they're not great.
We understand that NASA has sent out search and rescue parties already. What would they be looking for? Any signs of parachute descent? Is there any way they can pick that up on special instruments?
That might be picked up on radar. There are no special instruments. However, each crew member has a radio which has an emergency beacon, and those are the standard emergency beacons that boats have and parachutists have, aircraft have, and they do allow rescuers to find your location.
A question which everybody will inevitably be asking, and we have to ask it, of course, indicating it's only because of the general times we live in, but whenever we see any kind of catastrophe these days, we wonder if terrorism could conceivably be involved. But from what we understand from NASA, this was at least 40 miles high when the trouble happened. Can you imagine that there could be any possible connection to terrorism at such a height?
I would think that would be extraordinarily unlikely. The only country with any sort of capability to do intercepts on a vehicle moving that fast is the United States, and even at that, it's still in an experimental and test phase for us, so it's doubtful that this is a terrorist act.
How disturbed would you be if you were flying in it about the idea that a piece of insulation had broken off, as we understand it did, from the fuel tank and hit the wing of the shuttle on takeoff?
I couldn't hear that question. You're coming in very faintly on my phone here.
Yes, Mr. Thagard, we're speaking with former shuttle astronaut Norman Thagard. Mr. Thagard, we understand in reports we're seeing today that a piece of insulation did break off of the fuel tank when the Columbia was taking off on January 16th and is believed to have hit the wing of the shuttle. Would that be of concern to you if you were flying in the shuttle, and what problem would it cause?
Well, that material on the fuel tank is pretty soft material. However, if it did cause damage, or if anything caused damage to the leading edge of the wing, it would be a bad situation. And of course, it would depend on the amount of damage, but it potentially could be a bad situation.
Right. We understand that in 42 years of U.S. space flight, there has never been an accident during the descent to Earth on landing, though there have been other accidents, of course. We also now understand that President Bush was informed about the Space Shuttle Columbia and is awaiting more information. Also, officials say there's no information that terrorism is involved, and as former shuttle astronaut Norman Thagard has just told us, he thinks it's extremely unlikely there could be any terrorism involved, given that it was at least 40 miles high when the trouble began. That's, Mr. Thagard, 40 miles high. Give us a feeling for how much still in outer space that is. There's virtually no atmosphere there, is that right?
There's very little atmosphere. Sort of arbitrarily, we assign 50 miles as the beginning of space, and in fact, if you're going to get your astronaut wings, that is the altitude we use. Anyone flying above that altitude is awarded astronaut wings.
Right, and if you could just talk us very quickly again through what the normal procedure for you all is, looking out for possible trouble when you come in on what up until now have been the routine landings coming in from orbit. What do you experience inside the shuttle as you're coming down, and at what altitude do you begin to experience it in terms of heat and the buildup of the flames around the shuttle?
Well, of course, different astronauts have said different things. I came back 5 times on the space shuttle, and I was always impressed of how smooth and uneventful it was. Of course, you have a 3-person crew for the entry. There may be other people on board, but it is the commander, the pilot, and the flight engineer that concern themselves with the vehicle's performance during entry, and you basically just follow your checklist, and normally it's very routine, and you go down through the procedure step by step with little consequence.
And as the heat builds up around the shuttle, are you able to tell that there are flames around it and that the shuttle is...
Here, which was now shot over North Texas, there's something falling out of the sky. There has been no official confirmation as to what that was at this point. Sam Knight in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, we appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you for your insight.
Yes, sir, and I'm sorry for the tragedy.
Thank you very much, sir. Again, nothing official just yet, but as Bill Harwood and others have told us, it does not look good. President Bush has been informed of the situation,
Yeah,
correct?
I just want this wire copy. President Bush has been informed about Space Shuttle Columbia, is awaiting more information now from NASA, and officials say there's no information that terrorism is involved, and I'm sure that's going to be, you know, the first question on the minds of people ever since September 11th, and the fact that there was an Israeli astronaut on board the Space Shuttle Columbia this time around.
And security was beefed up for that reason.
Security was beefed up for this 16-day mission, although we asked that question to Bill Harwood a little bit earlier in our coverage here, and he seemed to speculate that the shuttle would be at 200,000 feet at this point when it may have broken up, and that the idea of somebody being able to have an act of terrorism at that level would not have been a possibility.
Unlikely. Bill Harwood is our Hardman is our man at the Harwood. I'm sorry, Harwood. I apologize, Bill. Is our man at the Kennedy Space Center. Bill, you still there?
I sure am, Russ.
Bill, what's the latest from your end?
Well, I'm just reconfirming Mission Control says the shuttle was at an altitude of 200,000 feet roughly when they lost communications with it. You can certainly see a shuttle at that altitude. You can see it when it's in orbit, when the lighting is right. As a matter of fact, a lot of us go out and watch it fly over quite frequently. And during entry, when it has a hot contrail behind it, that plasma trail as it comes through the atmosphere, it's very visible at that altitude. We don't know that that's where it broke up. It could have been lower than that. That's simply where the communications were lost from it. The contingency procedures are still in effect, and obviously they're still warning people to stay away from any debris. At this point, there's no way to know where debris would have actually fallen, given the altitude and how fast it was going at that moment.
As we heard earlier, the folks at NASA have alerted emergency crews in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to be aware of any debris there. Specifically, short of finding any debris, what is NASA waiting on before making some sort of official announcement here?
Well, I think, you know, like anything, you'd like to be able to know where it came down before you declared something, even though nobody thinks the shuttle survived. And I don't see how a crew could have gotten out of a breakup at that altitude. They have pressure suits on, but those are SR-71 spy plane type pressure suits. They're only good from, you know, under 100,000 feet. At that altitude, I don't think they would save anyone, even if you could get out. And certainly at that speed, they're not designed to exit a spacecraft going at Mach 12, which is what I believe they said, 12 times the speed of sound, or 12,000 miles an hour, I believe they said. So I don't think they could have gotten out. I think NASA just wants to make absolutely sure where it came down, but they've declared a contingency, which means that there has been an emergency, and that's in a shuttle with a glider. We're now 58 minutes past when it would have landed. It's definitely on the ground somewhere.
We talked about this earlier, Bill. We're coming up now on 1 hour after the scheduled landing of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Take us behind the scenes. What's going on down there at Mission Control?
It's really two things, Russ. On the one hand, these men and women in Mission Control are extremely trained. They are going through procedures that have all been thought out in advance. What you do to protect data, you want to make sure you save all the data on hard drives so you can go back later and analyze it to find out what might have led to this failure and exactly what happened. At the same time, though, Russ, there's a real human drama going on, too, because these flight controllers train with these astronauts on a daily basis before flights. They're good friends, and all of them know in the back of their minds that those friends have probably been lost. I think it's a terrible climate to work in, and it must be a crushing moment in Mission Control right now.
It is now 10:15, 25. 10:15, 25 seconds here on the East Coast. We are coming up on 10:16, which would officially mark the 1 hour mark that the Space Shuttle Columbia was scheduled to land in Florida. At this time, we want to update you as to what's going on. Breaking story from NASA's Mission Control in Houston. NASA has declared an emergency after losing communication with the Space Shuttle Columbia just minutes, 16 minutes in fact, before it was to land. The shuttle was to land at 9:16, as I just told you, Eastern Time at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and officials lost contact with the shuttle around 9 o'clock as it passed over Texas. Once again, you're looking at video here shot in North Texas of something coming out of the sky. No official word as to what it is just yet. NASA ordered flight controllers to retain all their records. The shuttle had 7 astronauts on board for a 2-week science mission, including 6 Americans and 1 Israeli. The wives, husbands, and children of the astronauts who had been waiting at the landing strip in Florida have been gathered by NASA, and they've been taken to a separate place. And once more, I want to tell you, there is still no official word as to what has happened. Official being the big, strong word there. But NASA has put out a public advisory to avoid any debris that may have come from the space shuttle. Search and rescue teams have been dispatched in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The orbiter was in altitude rather, of 200,700 feet, traveling at about 12,500 miles per hour when contact was lost. Gretchen Carlson, you've got another eyewitness.
I do. Stuart Fleming lives in Corsicana, Texas. Stuart, are you on the phone with us?
Yes, I am. I can barely hear you.
You can barely hear me. Well, I will try and speak up as much as I possibly can. If you can tell us this morning, did you go out to specifically watch the shuttle coming in?
No, I was just inside making breakfast, and I heard like the sonic bang. It's a noise I've never heard before. And I just went outside to see what it was, and there was like a big plume of white smoke, like a trailing plume of white smoke about just 100 meters from my head. Or maybe a bit further, but it was quite close, you know what I mean? And then about 15 minutes later on the news, they said the shuttle went missing. So, you know, 2 and 2 together equals 4.
Right. So Stuart, you were not specifically up around 8 a.m. Central Time in Texas this morning to go outside and watch the shuttle for its reentry.
No, I wasn't aware that the shuttle was actually coming back today. I was just, you know, doing life.
So you would have no idea that this was actually the shuttle. What was going through your mind after you heard that noise and then you proceeded to go outside?
I heard the noise and I said to my partner, I said, what was that noise? It sounded like something just killed everything. It was such a bizarre noise, you know what I mean? It was a noise I'd never heard before. And when I went outside, I could see the white smoke. And I'm like, well, it looks like the smoke from one of those aeroplanes that, you know, had smoke and they write letters with it.
Right.
And it was just this trail of white smoke, and it was just, but you could see where the white smoke started and where it ended. It didn't come all the way from up in the sky. It only started halfway in the sky, and then it went to the ground.
We're looking at pictures of that right now, Stuart.
Oh, okay. And it was just, I don't know. And then I said to my husband, can you go outside and look? I said, look at that. That is just too strange. And so he went and had a look, and I don't know. And then 15 minutes later on the news, it was on the news. And I'm like, that's it.
You put two and two together that that's in fact what had most likely transpired outside of your home this morning.
I think so. You know what I mean? It's so bizarre because, I don't know.
Have you ever seen the shuttle come in then for re-entry on a normal flight pattern?
No, I'm from Australia. We don't have spaceships.
Right. So this would be the first time for you. We're sorry that this is the first experience that you may have had. We appreciate your insights this morning. Stuart Fleming in Corsicana, Texas.
I'm actually from Australia.
Russ?
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gretchen. As we've told you, Ilan Ramon, a colonel in Israeli's Air Force and a former fighter...
And stuff, because they're saying not touch nothing or stuff like that. So I don't know if I'm going to have anything or not. But here's my boss. You can talk to her.
Yeah, I'm sorry to do that. He was, you know, up here and telling me all kinds of stuff. Hello?
Who did we just hear from, please?
Lynn, what's your last name? That's what I thought, Lynn Hearn.
Okay, I apologize. I was a little confused. I didn't know you handed the phone over. Somebody was yakking at me in my ear. I apologize for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so he smells burning rubber. He hasn't gone out to investigate just
He's
yet.
going out right now. I had him stand by in case he knew of something.
Yeah, okay. And now you're not a member of the authorities. You're a scanner listener, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We were woken up by this rumble.
Right.
Today we were trying to sleep in on Saturday, and we heard this, sounded like a train going through our property. We have 240 acres, and it sounded like it was in, you know, the driveway.
Yeah, yeah. What's next in that part of the world? Do you have any sense
We're
of
in
any...
East Texas. We're kind of in between Houston and Dallas.
What I'm trying to get a sense of what's going on right now. You're getting a sense that there's any sort of search or rescue effort underway at the moment?
Yes, there's a tremendous effort underway. All the counties on the scanner, you can hear them. They're finding debris from all over the place.
I wonder if you could put your phone up to one of those scanners for us and keep us. Is there a way you could do that for us? We could hear it.
I'm trying to get here.
Yeah. Are they talking about it right now?
Now they're not. It's not. Earlier there was somebody that had reported in Zavala that there was something huge couldn't tell because of the tremendous fog. The fog has now lifted, so any debris should be quite visible.
Have you? Oh, you said it was foggy at the time, then, huh?
Yes, tremendous fog. There, the haze was reported at one time that there was probably not even a half a mile visibility. On our property, I couldn't see very far.
Have you heard anything on those scanners that gives you any sense that anybody was injured on the ground?
I did not hear of any injuries. I only heard of a bunch of debris being found in different places. One gentleman supposedly pulled off of Highway 69 in, near Zavala, near the lake, the fishing lake down in Zavala, because he had seen debris falling.
I see. Okay. Well, would you do us a favor? Keep an open line to us, and if you would listen to those scanners for us, and if you hear anything, or if you can put a tape recorder on it so we can hear what's going on, we'd appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, stay on the line. All right, who else do we have with us? No response. I will assume that means nobody. So let's take a... I don't know who this is. Who is this, please?
This is Benjamin Laster.
Benjamin,
Yes.
good to have you with us. I'm sorry I'm not getting a lot of guidance out here as to who's on the line, so I apologize. Benjamin, you are from Central Texas as well?
Yes, I'm in between 7 Points and Kemp, Texas. And my wife and I, my wife had said the shuttle would be coming over. And so my wife and I and my child went outside, and along with my dad, and we seen the shuttle coming over. And as we seen it coming over, we seen a lot of light, and it looks like debris and stuff was coming off of the shuttle. But they said, "Look at this stuff coming off the shuttle." And I said, "That's probably the shields on the shuttle that keep it from when it enters, not to get too hot."
Yeah.
And so as we kept looking, we seen it out the back door, and we come to the front door, and we seen large masses of pieces coming off of the shuttle. And as it was coming by, we also noticed, because it seemed awful close, a plane pretty close to it, but we didn't see any kind of impact.
All right, Benjamin, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt you, because I'm having a hard time hearing you. They keep talking to me. Did you say there's a plane nearby?
It was a plane nearby the shuttle as it was going.
No, I'm not talking to the producer in the control room. Please be quiet in the control room for 1 minute. I want to talk to Benjamin. Benjamin, you said a plane was nearby?
It seemed like a plane was nearby. It sure did. As it was going by, I said, "Ooh, that's awful close." That's what we said, you know, that plane being that close.
What sort of plane, Benjamin?
It looked like a commercial jet. I mean, it was...
Oh, all right. So this could have just been a coincidence, seeing it. Or would you normally see a commercial jet in that area at where you saw it?
I guess you would, but not that close to the shuttle. I mean,
well, when you say how close to the shuttle, how close do you mean?
Well, I mean, looking from where I was looking, it seemed like they were awful close, and I mean, it just seemed like they was awful close, like it could have been even a close call. But you know, we didn't notice anything from there. But then after we was on the front porch, the house kind of shook, and we noticed a sonic boom. That kind of shook the house. At least we thought it was a sonic boom, but you know, I don't know. And then we seen a big continuous puff of vapor or smoke stream come out, and then we noticed a big chunk go over, and that's what we saw.
All right, Benjamin Lester, joining us from that part of Central Texas. And we should caution our viewers, and this is no reflection on Mr. Lester or anybody else we're going to be hearing from, but frequently we get witness accounts at this juncture of any incident, plane crash, whatever it may be, that do not bear themselves out. The fact that an airplane was nearby, I should tell you that the space shuttle was at an altitude of 200,000 feet. So even if there was a commercial airliner or any sort of airplane in that area, it would have been significantly lower. So we'll just leave that at that. Thank you, Benjamin. Let's go to CNN's Suzanne Malveaux at the White House. And apparently the president has been at Camp David. They've set up a bit of a task force within the government to try to go through all this and get a sense of what happened. And he will be on his way to the White House right around the noon hour to, you know, get a full, his hands on the reins here in order to get a sense of what's going on and how to proceed as the investigation begins very early. Now, Gene Meserve told us, and it's very, I want to caution that we mention terrorism in this day and age always when things like this happen, because the sad fact is that is a part of our life right now. But the initial indication that we have from Gene Meserve, who has covers Homeland Security for us, and from just plain common sense, is that a shuttle streaking along as it is right now, 6 times the speed of sound, 200,000 feet, is not in a place where it could become a target of terrorism. Let's go to Suzanne Malveaux at the White House now. Suzanne, tell us about what the president is doing right now.
Well, the president is heading back to the White House. As you know, he was to spend the weekend at Camp David. He was notified of the situation earlier this morning. We are told that they are trying to get as much information as possible, but they realized how serious it was, and it was the decision, the best decision, that the president come back here to the White House to monitor situations here. As you can imagine, it is a very serious tone here at the White House. We have seen administration officials, we've seen staffers rushing back here once they heard the news. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of activity here later in the day. We have not been told yet whether or not there's going to be any type of formal briefing, but as you...
Se cree que algo falló, hubo una explosión. Le queremos recordar que el Centro Espacial de NASA en Houston es muy importante en todas estas misiones. El control del vuelo se hace desde la ciudad de Houston. Las computadoras de NASA de la ciudad de Houston aún estaban en control de este vuelo porque estaba a 200,000 pies de altura. El piloto principal toma posesión de la nave a unos 50,000 pies de altura cuando están listos para aterrizar. No se sabe qué pasó. Este es el video que se está mostrando. Aparentemente hubo una explosión. A bordo había 7 astronautas, incluyendo el primer astronauta israelí, Ilan Ramón, coronel de la Fuerza Aérea y expiloto de aviones caza. El presidente Bush, la Casa Blanca, informó que no hay ningún tipo de indicación que esta explosión fue provocada por algún acto terrorista. Esto se acaba de comunicar. Le queremos recordar que a través de todo el día, obviamente, tendremos amplia información. Estaremos, obviamente, en NASA. NASA de la ciudad de Houston es muy importante en todos estos vuelos porque desde aquí las computadoras de nuestra ciudad son las que tienen el control de estos vuelos. El transbordador Columbia aparentemente explotó. Es la nave más vieja del programa espacial. Su primer vuelo fue en 1981, pero hace algunos meses tuvo pues una modernización de varios millones de dólares. No creen que fue algo por la edad del Columbia. Sin embargo, lo más reciente es por el video que se ha mostrado, video de aficionado, que es una explosión. Estaban a 200,000. Aquí está, mire usted. Hay aparentemente una separación. Se están ya hablando de varias teorías, pero mecánicas. Una vez más, la Casa Blanca acaba de indicar que no creen o no hay ningún tipo de indicación que fue algún acto terrorista. 7 personas iban a bordo. Esta misión era científica. 16 días en el espacio. Algo muy curioso también es que en la estación espacial ahorita hay 3 personas. La NASA tendrá que enviar un transbordador en los próximos días por estas personas o para llevar pues comida, alimentos. Entonces, la vez pasada, cuando el Challenger explotó, se suspendieron los vuelos del programa transbordador. No se puede hacer esto. Hay 3 personas en el espacio y hay que ir por ellos en los próximos días. No se sospecha exactamente que sea un ataque terrorista. Esto lo acaba de informar la Casa Blanca. 7 personas aparentemente han perdido la vida. Tendremos amplia cobertura a través de todo el día y, por supuesto, a las 5 de la tarde, aquí en Noticias 45, su fuente de información en español, los fines de semana. Mantenga la sintonía. Estamos trabajando para usted.
La situación mecánica con los aparatos de vuelo se perdieron por completo. Así que la NASA perdió comunicación técnica y también perdió comunicación verbal con los 7 astronautas que viajaban en este transbordador. A los 7 minutos del momento en que debía haber ocurrido el aterrizaje, se ordenó la salida de los periodistas del lugar que estaban esperando precisamente ver cómo aterrizaba el transbordador, sin que hubiese indicio alguno todavía del transbordador. En los 42 años de vuelos espaciales de la NASA nunca ha perdido una tripulación durante un aterrizaje o de regreso a órbita. En el 86, el transbordador Challenger, como ustedes recordarán, estalló poco después del despegue. Este fue el otro y único accidente que había tenido la NASA con un transbordador, donde también murieron todos los astronautas que iban a bordo. Esto sucedió en el despegue. La seguridad había sido muy estricta para la misión espacial de 16 días.
Nelson pointed out earlier, the senator from Florida who flew on the 24th shuttle mission, which also took place aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia, which blew up today, that on the 27th of January 1967, 3 astronauts died on the pad at Cape Kennedy. This was Virgil Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Bill White. Then in 1987, the 28th of January, just one day after the anniversary, if you want to put it that way, of the deaths on Apollo 1, suddenly you had the Space Shuttle Challenger. And now, 16 years almost to the day after that tragedy, we have the explosion aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia. Nobody at this point has any more details. Everybody's scrambling to come up with anything to say. An international mission, the White House has ruled out the possibility of terrorism, as somebody pointed out. You'd have to have a missile capable of hitting at 38 miles, and there are only a handful of countries that have that. That's not something you can do from a shoulder-launched rocket. So this appears to be a catastrophic technological failure. And now, after the Space Shuttle Challenger went down, after the Challenger accident, there were a long series of hearings on Capitol Hill with recriminations and so on. You may recall there was a debate about O-rings. It turned out that there was the failure to seal near one of the engines, an O-ring produced by Morton Thiokol. That produced a long series of investigations and about a 2-year shutdown in the shuttle mission. Now, this year, NASA had planned on putting together a very ambitious series of flights in support of the International Space Station. My guess is that those will also be put on hold indefinitely, pending the investigation into what went on today.
Tony Snow, if you would stand by for just a moment, a few more questions for you.
And we have with us on the phone Luke Ward. He is the mayor of Fairfield, Texas. The shuttle was going over the area in Texas when it apparently disintegrated into flames. A lot of witnesses there report hearing a big bang about 9:00 a.m., right around the same time when radio and data communication with the shuttle was lost as NASA was trying to communicate. And Luke Ward, mayor of Fairfield, Texas, was a witness as well. Are you on the phone? Can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I sure can.
Thanks for being with us. Tell us what you heard and what you saw, if anything.
Contingency plans designed to secure all information and data pertinent to today's descent by the Space Shuttle Columbia. Communications with the Space Shuttle Columbia were lost at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time this morning at an altitude of about 200,000 feet above north central Texas, as Columbia was en route to a landing planned at 8:16 a.m. Central Time at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. At the time communication was lost, Columbia was traveling approximately 12,500 miles per hour.
You've been listening
Search and rescue teams in the
NASA. We continue to listen.
vicinity and in portions of East Texas and other pertinent areas have been alerted to the Space Shuttle contingency. Any debris that may be related to the Space Shuttle contingency that is located should be avoided and may be hazardous due to the toxic nature of propellants that are used on board the Space Shuttle. Any locations of debris should be immediately reported to local law enforcement agencies. This is Mission Control, Houston.
We have periodically, and we will do so, anytime Mission Control speaks, we will take it live and interrupt whatever we are doing. But when we first heard, roughly 45 minutes, almost an hour ago, that they were warning the residents of Texas to beware of debris, it was that word that appeared to be an implicit admission that the Shuttle Columbia and its 7 crew members had been lost. And then, of course, came in the video that we have been watching so much of this morning, captured on videotape, of what appears to be Columbia breaking up in midair at 12,500 miles per hour, in excess of 200 feet over north central Texas.
And as one of our guests that we were speaking with pointed out, eerily similar to the Challenger when we saw that go down in 1986. That was on takeoff. Joining us, Luke Ward. He's the mayor of Fairfield, Texas, and he witnessed some of what we've been showing you here. Are you still on the phone with us?
Yes, ma'am, I sure am.
Thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about what you saw and what you heard as this shuttle went overhead.
Well, actually, I was sitting on the phone conversation with my neighbor, and just as I hung up, I heard it sound like, you know, somebody trying to kick the back door in. First thing I did is run to the front door to look out to see, you know, if I could see an explosion, because it was actually that loud, and then it actually continued to rumble for a good 1 or 2 minutes, like it's kind of like a truck with a flat tire, but just much intense. So I got a couple neighbors call and said, you know, had I heard it? And I said, yeah, we were just basically trying to figure it out. So I sat back and looked at the news, and no sooner than that, they said they lost contact with the shuttle. So then I began to say, could that possibly be the connection? And at that point, then they did say it was over north central Texas. So actually what we had heard was more than likely something from that.
Did you see any of this?
No, ma'am, I didn't. I never could. I looked out all directions. Matter of fact, I saw a contrail from what looked to be an airplane, but I never did see even any residual contrails or anything. So actually, I don't know if it was for whatever reason, we didn't see any trails or anything.
Right, and I'm sure you are aware that NASA now asking people, especially in your neck of the woods, to be careful for debris that could be dangerous, possibly toxic. Are you talking to your townspeople about this type of situation?
Our next goal is just to inform people not to touch anything, and if they find something, of course, to report it to local authorities, and of course they'll take it from there. That'd be the main thing to do, just to inform the citizens in the local areas not if they see something that looks strange, don't mess with it.
All right, so I imagine just a really frightening and disturbing situation there as what we're looking at, this Shuttle Columbia disaster. Looks like it was breaking apart right over that part of Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
Luke Ward, mayor of Fairfield, Texas, thanks for being with us on the phone.
As we continue to follow the Shuttle Columbia disaster, if we can, let me ask the control room to put up the collective picture of the crew. 7 astronauts on board, including an Israeli astronaut for the very first time. And here they are, Shuttle Commander Rick Husband, who had logged about 235 hours and 13 minutes in space. The shuttle pilot William McCool, who has over 2,800 hours of flight experience in 24 aircraft. Shuttle mission specialist Kaplana Chawla, who has a PhD, by the way, born in India, holds a PhD in aerospace engineering. And then also aboard this shuttle mission, specialist David Brown, who's logged more than 2,700 flight hours in 1,700 high-performance military aircraft. He is qualified, by the way, as first pilot in the NASA T-38. Let's listen in to NASA.
Communications were lost with the Space Shuttle Columbia at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time as it flew at an altitude of 200,000 feet and a speed of approximately 12,500 miles per hour toward a planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Touchdown for Columbia was scheduled for 8:16 a.m. Central Time in Florida. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth vicinity in portions of East Texas and other pertinent areas have been alerted to the Space Shuttle contingency. Any debris that may be located that may be related to the Space Shuttle's contingency should be avoided and may be hazardous due to the toxic nature of propellants used on board the Space Shuttle. Its location should be immediately reported to local law enforcement agencies. Further information will be released as it becomes available. This is Mission Control, Houston.
We will periodically be taking any word that we get from Mission Control in Houston. They've been periodically coming on and giving that warning that if anyone were to encounter debris, to stay away from it as it could be toxic. And if you are just joining us, we are covering the Shuttle Columbia disaster. There's still no official word from NASA on what might have happened as that shuttle had completed a successful mission and was heading back in to Earth for a landing. And there you see, and as we can see from the pictures, it appears that the shuttle disintegrated as it was coming in. You see pieces of debris and then several different trails of smoke instead of just one, indicating that there is a breakup of the object moving through the air. The shuttle had been missing, lost radio contact about 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with Mission Control. It was due to come in for a landing in Florida at 9:15. And we are getting word as well from people that raise the question, especially as to whether or not the shuttle could have been a terror target, because there was an Israeli on board, the first Israeli ever to be in space in a shuttle, and senior White House officials saying that there was no reason to believe that there was any threat made against the flight or the shuttle, and that at an altitude of 207,000 feet over north central Texas, which is where the shuttle was when it lost contact, it would be out of range of surface-to-air missiles. Our Tony Snow in Washington has also been following the latest developments in this tragedy. He joins us as well. And President Bush canceling his weekend retreat at Camp David, coming back to what looks like a national tragedy.
Well, absolutely, Karen. And obviously, everybody has to assess what happened. The bizarre thing is that we've seen these pictures of trails through the sky, but nobody, at least to our knowledge yet, has recovered even a single piece of debris. Everybody now is trying to make sense of what seems senseless. The other interesting, I guess, bit of speculation will be they seem to have successfully re-entered the atmosphere. That happens at about 400,000 feet. Halfway home, there appears to have been an explosion. The people said it sounded like a car blowing up out on the street, at least according to one wire report. So it shook windows in Texas. So we're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that is all about. But once you get past the technical aspects, the president does sort of what Ronald Reagan did after the Challenger accident. You may recall there was a teacher on board. Her name was Krista McAuliffe. This was one of the attempts by NASA back in the late 1980s to say, you know what, space flight is something that's available to all. In fact, there was a call for journalists and politicians and others to join the ride. That was a sobering experience. And since then, we've had no such efforts by NASA to bring on so-called civilians, although the Russians have been taking on some people who will pay to get on. Well, this time, we have for the first time an Israeli aboard, an Israeli pilot. It's one of those things that draws a lot of public attention. NASA had invited me and a number of others to come down and see it. Unfortunately, I was unable to go see the launch, unfortunately, because I'm told they're spectacular things. So the president now faces the challenge of saying something. Now, after the Challenger accident, you may recall that the President Reagan gave a wonderful, heartfelt speech that actually drew from an old prayer that TV stations used to read at the end of the night when TV stations actually went off the air at about midnight or 1 a.m. And it talked about slipping the surly bonds of earth and touching the hand of God. Well, this is one of those times where a president will reach for eloquence, but George W. Bush is somebody who tries not to overreach. We have seen that he is strongest when he speaks in simple, declarative, and heartfelt terms. It may be that the White House simply will issue a written statement. Who knows? But at a time like this, all of us are in complete awe. We have no idea what goes on. A lot of us, of course, think of space flight as something wonderful and exotic and something that's in the province of people who are a lot smarter than we are. In this particular mission, this was one where they actually bid for the experiments that would be conducted. It's become such a competitive business that if you want something done, you've got to put forward a proposal to NASA, and only the best ones win. And as I pointed out earlier, one of the things they were studying on this was astronaut safety and health. It's a grim irony, and one certainly hopes that at least they got some data that may be useful. But on the technical side, until we know what happened today, we're certainly not going to know how to fix it. As I mentioned earlier, this almost certainly is going to lead to a suspension of all NASA flights for the time being, and I would be stunned if we didn't hear something from NASA sometime today. And obviously, if that should happen, we'll bring it to you on Fox News Channel. But here in Washington, like everywhere else, we see the pictures. We try to take stock. You have a certain prayerful awe because this is something too terrible to comprehend, and yet the pictures aren't going to lie. Today, a lot of astronauts died.
Tony Snow, thank you very much. We want to show you once again, if we may. There is the crew, all 7 of them, including for the very first time an Israeli astronaut, the shuttle commander Rick Husband, shuttle pilot William McCool, shuttle mission specialist Kaplana Chawla, born in India, shuttle mission specialist David Brown, shuttle mission specialist Michael P. Anderson, shuttle mission specialist Laurel Blair Sultan Clark, who, by the way, is a doctor. She has an MD degree. Shuttle payload specialist Ilan Ramon, who is a colonel in the Israeli Air Force, who has accumulated more than 3,000 flight hours, a hero among Israelis. And there are the 7 crew members who are believed to be lost, though we are not receiving any official word from NASA as yet. But based upon their own admission that they are searching for a debris field and warning residents of Texas to beware of it, but also the fact that we have seen these pictures which seem to indicate that the space shuttle itself at some point after re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and then as it was about 200,000 feet above Earth, traveling at 12,500 miles per hour seemed to break up, according to the pictures. And again, once, as we've been saying before, so reminiscent of that fateful day, January 28, 1986, when we saw something similar, not upon the landing process, but rather the takeoff of the Space Shuttle Challenger when it exploded shortly after takeoff.
What we are seeing is an amateur video shot by just a bystander out of Dallas, Texas. And there you can see, this is new, and you can see a little bit more clearly 3 different trails of smoke and debris coming down. And the trees obscuring it a little bit, but we also had some video from some of the affiliates there in Dallas, Texas, showing that definitely something wasn't right.
It bears repeating that we have talked to a couple of experts, one of them a former astronaut this morning. At that rate of speed, again, in excess of 12,000 miles per hour, it would be nearly impossible for a human being unprotected with just a space suit to have survived the friction of that rate of speed, and moreover likely wouldn't be able to survive at that altitude for very long. Again, roughly 207,000 feet over north central Texas.
And it is important to note, as Tony Snow was alluding to as well earlier when we heard from him, that we take it for granted. This is such a difficult thing to do, to launch a space shuttle and to safely bring it back to Earth. The slightest nuance can really make the difference. If you come in at an angle just slightly different than how you're supposed to, this can burn up. And in 42 years of U.S. manned space flight, there has never been an accident happening during the descent to Earth or landing. As we know, in 1986, as you just said, Greg, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploding shortly after liftoff. We do have someone on the phone with us, Congressman Joe Barton. He's on the committee that oversees NASA. He represents the district where this shuttle apparently disintegrated. Thanks for being with us, Congressman.
Oh, well, I'm not happy to be with you on this occasion, but I'm pleased to talk to you. So.
And as I was just saying, you oversee NASA. This is explain just how difficult and how much maneuvering and how much goes into making these things happen and making sure that this happens safely, and how tough it can be to get these things on the ground safely.
Well, the space shuttle, first of all, is technology that's approximately 20 to 30 years old. It's basically a big glider. When it comes back in from space, the computers control it until it almost is ready to land, and it's on a very narrow glide path, and the tiles are designed so that it absorbs the heat and keeps the craft from burning up. And we don't know what happened. We do think that it fell somewhere over north central Texas, probably in my congressional district.
8 a.m. Central Time, as Columbia was above north central Texas at an altitude of 200,000 feet, traveling approximately 12,500 miles per hour. Search and rescue forces in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and in other portions along Columbia's planned route have been alerted to the Space Shuttle program contingency. Any debris that may be found that may be related to the Space Shuttle contingency should be immediately reported to local authorities and avoided. Debris may be hazardous due to the toxic nature of propellants used on board the Space Shuttle. Further information will be released as it becomes available. This is Mission Control, Houston.
And again, Congressman, we had to interrupt you. Periodically, NASA's Mission Control comes on and gives a little bit of a warning about staying away from the debris field, which I'm sure your own constituents need to know. And so we were interrupted. So if you could continue, as you were telling us before, this situation looks like the debris field is going to be in your own district, and you are...
well, we've already got search helicopters around my hometown in the county that I live in, Ellis County, which is just southeast of Dallas-Fort Worth. My senior staffer heard the boom at her home. I'm actually in Waco, Texas, so I was not there when it happened. What I had said that I hope I could repeat, this is a tragic accident, but it is very important for the United States and the world that we be in space. I'm on the subcommittee that oversees NASA. We'll have a complete investigation. I've already touched base with the White House and NASA, offered my services and the congressional services. I hope that once we find out what happened, if we can find out what happened, that we can take corrective measures on the existing shuttle craft that we still have, keep the current program going, and perhaps build a new shuttle with new technology that might make things like this even less likely to happen in the future.
Congressman, we know that the Shuttle Columbia is the oldest of the shuttles that fly these missions. Any concerns about whether or not that might have played a part?
Well, the shuttle fleet, each shuttle has got a life expectancy and a number of flights that it's guaranteed for, and the Columbia was well within its life expectancy. In other words, the airframe was safe and had been inspected to be secure and trustworthy. So, again, without knowing what happened, I'm not going to speculate, but I guarantee you the NASA people would not have put that shuttle up if they had thought that there was a structural problem, that it couldn't withstand the reentry. Something unforeseen happened. It hit something, or the computer software went wrong, or there's been some speculation about terrorism. I don't think that's
and Congressman,
probability. So
let me have you pause there for a moment on that very subject. We want to reiterate what we reported earlier, that a senior U.S. official is saying there was no threat made against the flight and that the shuttle was out of range of a surface-to-air missile when it lost contact with NASA. There are 6 Americans and an Israeli on board, the latter of which prompted tighter than usual security when Columbia was launched on January 16th. So we do want to emphasize that point. Also want to report that the Homeland Security Department is saying that there is no information at this time that this was a terrorist incident. They are reiterating what the White House is also saying.
And if you are on the phone still with us, Congressman, you said you did touch base with the White House today. What was said?
That they were establishing contact with NASA and that they were right on top of it, and they were going to make sure that there was a full investigation. And they were also trying to contact the chairman of the Full Science Committee, Sherwood Bollard of New York, and the ranking Democrat, Ralph Hall of Texas. And I was the first congressman to contact them because it's in my district, and I just offered my services, and on behalf of the committee, that I'm sure that the chairman and the ranking Democrat would work very cooperatively with the White House and NASA.
Congressman, thank you very much for taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule to talk with us. We appreciate it. The Space Shuttle Challenger has apparently disintegrated in flames over Texas minutes before it was to land. And some of the debris has, Columbia, I apologize. The Space Shuttle Columbia has disintegrated in flames. Let's go to Keith Landry of our Fox affiliate, who's standing by at Cape Kennedy. Keith, what can you tell us? Were you with some of the family members?
No, the family members were in a VIP delegation. We were out at the area where the media assembles to cover the landing of the Space Shuttle Columbia. They are off in a separate delegation. They were taken away. We have not seen them. We have not spoken to them. They are not in a location where the media can talk to them. The latest here right now, we are in a holding pattern. We are waiting for the officials of NASA here at Kennedy Space Center to convene a news conference to tell us what's going on. They are still assessing information. Most of the information is coming out of Houston this morning. We can tell you that Space Shuttle Columbia was supposed to end a 16-day mission. This was mission number 107, and it was supposed to touch down on runway 33 here at Kennedy Space Center at 9:16 Eastern Standard Time. But at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central Time, Houston lost contact with the Space Shuttle Columbia and has not heard anything from it since then. Now, the mood on the ground at that time, there are a lot of people who've been out here for many, many years watching the landings, watching the launches. They know exactly how it works and how it goes, what their standard procedures are. At about 3 minutes before it was scheduled to land, we were supposed to hear double sonic booms. And when that didn't happen, people started to wonder what was going on. And when the launch clock on the ground at the landing area got down to 0 and then kept going in the other direction, then we knew something was wrong. There were monitors set up here at the landing area that were supposed to show the media the descent of the shuttle, and those went to black. So it became very obvious very quickly that something was wrong here. Inside the building in front of me, the folks have very somber looks on their faces right now. The entire NASA staff, they really don't have a whole lot of information. Most of it is coming out of Houston. The obvious question here is what happens to the future of NASA's space shuttle program. Shuttle Atlantis was scheduled to go up March 1st, carrying some more parts for the International Space Station. That mission is in doubt right now, as NASA will have to regroup and assess what happened. 2 points of early speculation, and that's exactly what it is at this point. 2 points. A, when the shuttle launched 16 days ago, there was some foam that came off of one of the external rocket boosters and hit the left wing, damaging some of the tiles. There's speculation that the damage from that could have been considerable enough that on re-entry it somehow caused the shuttle to break up in midair. Engineers had looked at the left wing of the shuttle once it was in space, and they thought that it seemed to be okay. The second point for early speculation on the possible cause of this dates back to last year, July of 2002, when the shuttle originally was supposed to go up. The mission was delayed until this year because of a leak in some of the oxygen lines. Too early to say what role that may have played. It's going to take weeks or months to figure out what actually happened. But 7 astronauts, 6 Americans, 1 Israeli. The first Israeli in space, Ilan Ramon, apparently
family is in Israel right now. We're told that they have been shepherded away from the media because they may be receiving some bad news. Obviously, everyone hopes that's not the case, but that is the reality when something like this happens. And,
also, Jeff, the commander aboard, Rick Husband, is a Texan. He's originally from Amarillo, Texas, and the pilot, William McCool, is from Lubbock, Texas. So we had not just friends and neighbors from the Johnson Space Center and that area, the fact that they've been there and trained there, but the fact that we did have 2 native Texans aboard the shuttle today, the commander and the pilot.
Yeah, that's right, Cher. And I'm sure you all have been hearing just countless eyewitness accounts from what happened. I know before I left the newsroom this morning, we had phone calls from people who had family members near Dallas all the way down to Lake Livingston calling and saying, hey, they saw the big white streak. We actually got reports from some people who said that they felt the ground shaking in some different parts of Texas. And one interesting thing, too, I spoke with a pilot on a Continental Airlines flight who told us that they were underneath this when it happened. And they said that they could see debris and metal trailing down out of the sky, glinting off the bright sun over central Texas at this point. The pilot said, if we'd been a couple of minutes either way on this thing, some of that debris might have actually hit his aircraft. It did not, but it was a close call for him. He said that he was over central Texas when he saw this and saw you could see the debris field from his plane looking up at the contrails from where coming out of the shuttle. So it's all over Texas right now. People certainly are feeling this and experiencing this together.
Jeff Ealing, live from NASA. Jeff, we're going to come back to you, so stand by. NASA has promised to give us a live press update in 30 minutes from now from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I believe, or perhaps Mission Control here in Houston. We're still not sure. But again, we are bringing you live coverage here. You're looking now at the control room. This is just here in the Houston area, the Mission Control at the Johnson Space Center this morning, where they are in a state of shock because the shuttle Columbia has apparently disintegrated in midair as coming in, its descent, making its descent to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was 40 miles in the air, as Shara said before, traveling about Mach 6, but that's a good guess. That's about 12,000 miles an hour. Some people have already speculated that it may have been some kind of attack. There is no indication of that at all. In fact, some of the experts are saying 40 miles up in the air is way too far for anyone to shoot a missile up and hit anything moving at that speed. There is no indication of any cause as of yet, so we don't want to speculate about it. But again, these are pictures of when it blew up or disintegrated in midair.
We have a call now. Joanne Whitehead calling from Nacogdoches, Texas. Joanne, did you see debris? Did you see this accident happen?
No, as a matter of fact, I did not see anything until it was over with, and I had thought that I could not imagine what was happening to my home. I mean, every window in it was just shaking, and we have a large patio on the back of the house, and I mean, it was just vibrating, and the best thing I could describe is if it were like a train that was derailing. I mean, I've never heard so much noise all at one time.
About what time was it?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. We are in the path. Our home is like in the path, I'm sure, like a flight path going to, of course, they were going into Miami.
Right.
And there are pieces at just out of Nacogdoches, about 12 miles on the west side. There are pieces of it, and then as far away as Hemphill, Texas, there are pieces of it. In fact, there was one piece that fell in Hemphill that was still smoking, so it may have been the latter part of it.
And how do you know that? Have people come to report that locally, that there are pieces smoldering in the field?
Oh, yes, they have. Of course, they have already, everybody that finds anything is supposed to call in immediately, and they say that everything is very toxic and to stay in because even the air is toxic. Now, I don't know if that's from the burning. I'm not sure what that's from.
Well, there's all kinds of radiation
right.
in outer
so
space.
we're not out. Now, I can
High
see
atmosphere.
all around my home, and I do not see pieces of anything, but we have quite a bit of land here.
Right.
And I'm kind of thinking that when the time comes that we can get out and walk this land, that we perhaps may see something, because it came probably directly over our house or within a few feet of our house.
Right, and you said you're in the flight path of when these shuttles do land, and many times before people have reported hearing a sonic boom. This was a much bigger sound, am I right?
Oh, yes. It was like, if I knew what an atomic bomb sounded like, I'm sure that's kind of what it was.
All right,
Joanne Whitehead, thank you for calling in.
You're
Randy
welcome.
Ward from St. Augustine County is also on the line with us right now. Randy? Randy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Tell us what you saw.
Well, basically, I was standing out in the front yard, and suddenly I heard a large boom, followed by a series of echoing booms that just continued off to the west. And then suddenly things started raining down out of the sky. And it sounded like a boomerang whizzing through the air as they came to Earth.
And you saw some of these pieces. Did you see where
We
they
have
landed?
pieces laying all over the yard out here.
All over your yard?
We have pieces of aluminum. We have pieces of what appear to be a ceramic tile material. And we're walking around and locating where they are. We're careful not to pick them up.
Have you been calling the authorities?
We have not. This is basically the first phone call we've made.
Okay. We need to tell us exactly where in St. Augustine County you are. Give us
we're
some
just
cross-references.
we're just east of Sam Rayburn Lake, and I would say just west of St. Augustine City proper, about 12 miles.
Okay.
All right, Randy Ward from St. Augustine County, Texas, thank you very much. We've just been told that NASA has lowered its flag to half staff next to the countdown clock, a clear indication that NASA now believes that it was indeed an explosion in midair and that the Columbia flight is no more. We're going to take you back now live to the network coverage, ABC's Terry Moran from the White House.
As possible. As we told you earlier, NASA will be the first to tell the country as best it can what has happened, but we're now told the president will have something to say to the country after this incident later today, and we could also get a briefing from here. The situation here very fluid, with a lot of the senior staff still arriving, going into the Situation Room and just trying to get a handle on things. But the bottom line, the president should be back at the White House in about an hour and 20 minutes.
Right. By that time, we will apparently have heard a fair amount of detail from NASA. We understand that they will be having a press conference at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. But now that we know that NASA has also lowered its flag next to its countdown clock to half staff, apparently some very sad days ahead as the nation faces this. And indeed, as we just heard from George Stephanopoulos, the Israeli ambassador was told when he got his briefing that the Space Shuttle Columbia had broken up. Jim Slade, you've been following this for a long time. What do you think is going to be the general impact on the activity of the space program, given our experience after the 86 Challenger disaster and all of the intense scrutiny that followed for 2 years after that?
Go ahead. Thank you. Shuttles being locked down or grounded, so to speak. That augurs not too well for the people aboard the International Space Station. The shuttle is their main transportation. Now, they have a way off, they can come back aboard a Russian Soyuz that's parked at the space station. However, that presents a problem in bringing a new crew up. Without the shuttle, you're really stuck. That means that there's a possibility that the International Space Station will be put on autopilot and left dormant for a while until this can be cleared up and they can be resupplied. That's only one contingency, but that is a direct possibility.
What are the possibilities for getting astronauts off of the space station other than the shuttle?
They can come down on a Russian Soyuz that's parked there for just those kinds of contingencies. It's kept there on a standby basis. It's used as a lifeboat. It can carry 3 people. There are 3 people aboard the space station at this time. However, that presents a problem in replacing the crew. If they come down on the Soyuz, they may have to go back up on the Soyuz because with the shuttles grounded, for an investigation to see if there is anything wrong with the other 3, they may be without transportation for a very long time.
Right. Jim Slade, who's been following the space program for decades. Thank you, Jim. The crew on board, 6 Americans and 1 Israeli. The Americans, again, Shuttle Commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, who's from San Diego, payload commander Michael Anderson from Washington State, and also mission specialist Kalpana Chawla, 41-year-old pilot originally from Karnal, India, and a 41-year-old Laurel Clark of Racine, Wisconsin, a mission specialist. But also Israel's first astronaut, payload specialist Ilan Ramon, I believe it is, who is a 48-year-old Israeli Air Force colonel who has 4 children and a wife. It was a big and wonderful event for the state of Israel for him to go up on the shuttle, the first Israeli on the shuttle. This was his first flight, of course. John Yang, ABC's John Yang, is standing by in Israel, where it is now late afternoon. John, what have they learned there, and what can you tell us about the response and the reaction in Israel?
Well, as you say, Bill, this was a tremendously joyous story when this originally went up. When the launch was about 16 days ago, and it is just past sundown here, the end of the Jewish Sabbath. The story was developing just as sundown came, and so this story really has turned to tragedy as the Sabbath ended. Colonel Ramon is one of the most celebrated Air Force pilots. He was one of those that in 1981 flew the raid against the Iraqi nuclear reactor. This was a broadcast. This was, as you say, Bill, a moment of joy when it took when the launch came 16 days ago. The launch was carried live on Israeli television, and Israeli television was once again covering the expected landing live. In fact, Colonel Ramon's 79-year-old father was in the studios of Israeli Channel 2 preparing to be a guest, and of course, once this story developed, he was taken away from the studio. Colonel Ramon's wife and 4 children are in Texas. They were going to they had been planning with the Jewish community in Houston, planning a celebration once the Jewish Sabbath ended there at sundown tonight in Houston. Among the 9 personal items that Colonel Ramon took with him into space was a drawing from Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Museum here in Jerusalem. It was a drawing done by a 14-year-old Czechoslovakian victim from Auschwitz, a drawing of his depiction of the Earth as seen from the moon. It was going to be something that the colonel would go up and actually be able to see the Earth from space as this young boy imagined it. And now this story apparently has turned to tragedy that had been giving the Israelis some glimmer of hope and some glimmer of joy. But Bill, as it now appears this is becoming a tragic ending.
Thank you, John Young. In Israel, great joy turned to sadness as one of the heroes of Israel, a pilot who also fought in the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, is now among the missing. One of the 7 astronauts on board as Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated, coming in for a landing over Texas this morning. We now have apparently somebody describing in Texas some of the debris from the shuttle as it landed on the ground around the area just under where the breakup occurred. I'm told.
Well, basically, I was standing out in the front yard, and suddenly I heard a large boom, followed by a series of echoing booms that just continued off to the west. And then suddenly things started raining down out of the sky. And it sounded like a boomerang whizzing through the air as they came to Earth.
And you saw some of these pieces. Did you see where they landed?
We have pieces laying all over the yard out here.
All over your yard?
We have pieces of aluminum. We have pieces of what appear to be a ceramic tile material. And we're walking around and locating where they are. We're careful not to pick them up.
Have you been calling the authorities?
We have not. This is basically the first phone call we've made.
Okay. We need to let...
There is another eyewitness description of debris landing in and around the man's house. Many people rushed out when they heard this unusual explosion this morning as the Space Shuttle Columbia broke up just as it was coming in for a landing just after 9 o'clock. We do not yet have a formal announcement from NASA, who will have a press conference at 11:30 Eastern Time this morning, but they have very specifically indicated that we have a serious tragedy to deal with here. They have lowered the staff next to their countdown clock to half staff. Norm Thagard, former astronaut who has flown this shuttle before and has been talking to us this morning about what the astronauts do to prepare. Now that you're hearing more descriptions of this and hearing and being reminded of some of the sadness we apparently are facing, how is it hitting you?
Like the Challenger accident did, you get numb. Of course, it was different for me on Challenger accident since 4 of the 7 people there actually were from my astronaut 1978 group, so I knew them very well. I did not know this crew. Still in all, if you've done this and they're still essentially your colleagues and you feel a personal loss.
6 Americans and 1 Israeli apparently lost this morning coming in over Texas. Tell us some more about what kind of a community, fraternity and sorority the astronauts are. Those of us old enough can remember when there was only 6 or 7, and then it grew to 14, and now there must be hundreds of you. What kind of a support group are you for each other?
A very strong support group, and in fact, prior to each flight, there is another astronaut who is assigned as the NASA representative for the astronaut's family and will help the family through all of the launch preparation and through the mission, and then, of course, for some period of time immediately after the landing.
Rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and along other portions of the route of Columbia have been alerted. Any reports of debris that may be associated with the Space Shuttle's contingency should be made to local law enforcement authorities. The debris should be avoided as it may be hazardous due to toxic propellants used on board the Space Shuttle. Local law enforcement authorities are in touch with NASA search teams, and reports of debris should be directed to those authorities.
We're listening.
More information will be released as it becomes available. This is Mission Control, Houston.
This emergency, describing the search for debris. The search and rescue missions, as far as we know, are still underway, but we also know that NASA has lowered the flag next to the countdown clock to half staff. We also have reports that a senior law enforcement official, speaking on condition of anonymity, said that there has been some intelligence that raised concerns about a previously scheduled flight of Columbia, which was to have carried the same crew. The intelligence which was related to the Israeli astronaut Ilan Ramon was termed not credible, but the flight was postponed for other reasons. There's been no troubling intelligence regarding this flight, officials said, and they do not believe that terrorism was involved. We stress that again. We've talked to several experts about it this morning. Officials are telling us that there's no indication of terrorism here. The Space Shuttle Columbia was well over the 200,000-foot mark, more than 40 miles up. And what seems to have happened here, and the only thing likely to have happened here, according to any of the astronauts and other engineers and experts that we've talked to this morning, seems to be some kind of catastrophic breakup, some trouble on re-entry. The first time in the 42-year history of manned spaceflight in the U.S. program that there's been any kind of problem on re-entry. The 1986 Challenger explosion was on takeoff. That led to 2 years while they stopped the space program, a very intense investigation trying to figure out, analyzing not only engineering flaws but also procedural flaws, reviewing the entire program to see what had gone wrong and how to prevent it again. Since then, since 1986, that would be 17 years ago, the shuttle program has gone with only minor problems. There have been no disasters since that time, and we've all grown quite accustomed to it, a routine part of life in these United States. But now we can be sure that we will be in for another long period of investigation. There is an additional problem this time in that there is the International Space Station, which is supplied by the shuttle, going back and forth fairly frequently, bringing supplies and crew. If the shuttle program for some reason has to be suspended, there will be a problem about how to keep the International Space Station supplied. There is a rescue craft attached to the International Space Station so that crew on board have a way to get back to Earth. But one possibility already raised for us by Jim Slade, who is a consultant on the space program, is that there may be the need possibly to shut down the space station for a while. That's way too early to speculate about what exactly may happen. But there is clearly a period apparently of some great sadness and mourning facing us here, even at the time when the government is so preoccupied with other concerns overseas, and then the beginning of what's bound to be a very thorough investigation. For those of you just tuning in, the Space Shuttle Columbia has been lost. NASA has declared an emergency. It declared it this morning after losing communications with the Space Shuttle Columbia as it was coming in for a landing. It was due to land in Florida this morning at 9:16 Eastern Time. About 7 minutes after that, when the shuttle had not shown up, NASA asked the reporters there.
All right, we are joining you once again from here in our Houston studios. Tom Cook and Sheriff Fryer. On the phone, we have Jimmy Clunan from Lufkin, Texas. Jimmy, are you a reporter? We understand you're a reporter there?
Yeah, well, I work at the station. I used to be in news, but I work up front in the sales department. But here in East Texas, we're real tight little station here, but with the excitement this morning, I thought I'd come in and help them coordinate. And I've been taking calls all morning from East Texans with the buzz with this catastrophe, and everybody's talking about hearing and seeing smoke trails. And we have several confirmed reports of pieces down. We have reporters and photographers on the scenes taking pictures. The authorities have secured several of the areas.
And you're saying this is all around Lufkin?
Oh, no, ma'am. We're talking about deep East Texas, from Palestine to the lake area to Nacogdoches, all the way into Louisiana. St. Augustine, it's scattered about the countryside. But we do have a picture in downtown Nacogdoches with a piece of debris in there. We have reports from the St. Augustine area, man working in his yard, a piece hit his shop.
And what size pieces are we talking about, Jimmy? Was it just fine pieces of debris that came down? Were there sizable chunks that were still smoldering?
Well, Tom, I don't have that information. Right now we have the tapes heading our way. That's a second time someone asked me about the size of a thing, but I don't have anything on the size. But one of our photographers did call a minute ago and said he is taking a picture of a rocket booster impaled in the ground. And like yourselves, I'm curious to see the pictures, and as soon as those tapes come back, they'll be on our air, and I'm sure available to all the affiliates.
If you could shoot it to us email, that would be great. Any stills that you have.
Okay. I'm going to have to get with the webmaster here on hooking you up on that.
Jimmy, can you tell us where that rocket booster was? Was it in the area of Palestine?
No, it was in the Nacogdoches area.
In Nacogdoches area, okay.
Yeah.
We had reports, as you said, callers from all the way from Nacogdoches to Palestine, and certainly into eastern, or I should say, the western part of Louisiana, far east Texas.
Bossier City.
Bossier City.
Hemp
Hill, literally hundreds of people. In fact, so many people, the Louisiana State Police said, were calling in that they had to bring in extra people to answer the phones, and the phone lines got tied up because so many people heard and saw this morning.
You know, Saturday morning, there's normally the answer machine in our newsroom here, and we have 11 people running around in the building with another 10 or so out in the field working.
All right, the word that we need to get out to anybody who's in the area who think they have come across debris also is report it first to authorities. Do not touch it. It could be radioactive, and you should leave the area as soon as possible. You shouldn't be too close to it for very long, and sometimes there are even biological or even chemical agents that are present that can be very toxic. So a word of warning to people out there, if you're listening and you come across debris, report it and don't go trying to touch it and poke around on it yourself.
All right, Jimmy
Excellent
Cloonan.
information. Appreciate you talking to me, and I'm hoping to help you with some information further on down today.
All right,
Thank you, Jimmy, very much.
Jimmy Cloonan from Lufkin, Texas. We look forward to the pictures. There is the flag flying at half-staff next to the countdown clock at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. That says the Johnson Space Center, but that is not correct. That is the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where the countdown clock is located. NASA obviously indicating that a tragedy has occurred. As we said earlier this morning, Shara, NASA was in shock when this first happened. If you're just getting up at 10:30 on this Saturday morning, we can recap very quickly for you. NASA lost touch with the Space Shuttle Columbia about 8 o'clock this morning, Houston time. It was scheduled to land in Florida at 8:16 this morning. That is what people in the Dallas area, North Texas, saw. Plumes of smoke and then debris falling to the ground, an obvious indication of a major disaster. Now, we want to stress once again, there are no indications at all that it was anything terrorist connected. They simply do not know what happened to the Shuttle Columbia this morning. This comes nearly 17 years to the date. January 28th, 1986 is when the Challenger blew up on ascent. This is the first time NASA's ever had a problem with the shuttle on its landing.
Never, ever before. And we also had so many reports of people who heard incredible explosions, incredible booms, windows shaking and rattling as far away as Nacogdoches. Bossier City, Louisiana, so many phone calls coming in. And of course, now we're seeing this debris path we're having reports of, extending all the way from the Dallas-Fort Worth area across to Bossier City and perhaps even points eastward in Louisiana, which would have been on what would be the shuttle's flight path. We had 6 Americans aboard and 1 Israeli aboard that shuttle. A couple of the Americans were native Texans.
Right.
The commander, Rick Husband, is from Amarillo originally,
right. Pilot,
and the
Willie
pilot,
McCool.
Willie McCool from Lubbock, Texas.
Right.
All of them with very little space experience, but quite a bit of piloting and flying experience.
Right. In fact, only 2 of them had been in space before. The Commander Rick Husband has been in space before, and the payload specialist has also been in space before. Michael Anderson had flown once before to the Russia's Mir space station, and the other 5, of course, had not been in space before, but as somebody pointed out from NASA before, the training is so extensive, it's almost as if you have been there before. So experience counts, but it doesn't necessarily count when you're on a shuttle flight like this because the training is so extensive.
And
there
as you can see from the photo, 2 women aboard. Kalpana Chawla, who immigrated to the United States from India in the 1980s. She's been an astronaut since 1994. Laurel Clark is a Navy diving medical officer aboard submarines and then became a flight surgeon who became an astronaut in 1996. She was helping with science experiments, and her home is in Wisconsin. She has an 8-year-old son.
There was a report when Columbia took off January 16th that a piece of insulating foam fell off the shuttle. You're looking now at pictures from January 16th. This is the launch of the Shuttle Columbia. Of course, Columbia is the oldest of the 5 shuttles. It was first launched in 1980 with much fanfare as America began its shuttle program. It's taking to flight and returning to Earth with a plane-like vehicle. This is the launch of January 16th. Now, on this, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to see it, a piece of insulating foam, it was a very, very small piece of insulating foam, came off part of the front of the shuttle, and it actually hit part of the wing. Now, NASA assured reporters just this past Friday, because there were lots of questions about it, that it was not a serious malfunction. It was simply a piece of foam that hit the wing. There was no major damage, they said. They did not think it was any problem at all, and they did not think they would have any problem on its descent to Earth today. Now, over the last 16 days, these 7 astronauts have done some 80 scientific research experiments. This was an interesting flight because they did not go to the International Space Station this time. They actually conducted a live news conference from space just the other day. They did not go to the International Space Station this time. They decided to take a shuttle flight on Columbia and actually conduct all these scientific research experiments, some 80 of them in the past 16 days with this crew of 7. And they were scheduled to land, as we said this morning, at Kennedy Space Center.
We did hear earlier on the network people questioning whether there was a black box aboard the shuttle, and basically the entire shuttle is a black box, was the answer that we got from the experts at NASA, because it is constantly being monitored by Mission Control and has sensors virtually everywhere, cameras aboard, and so losing contact at 9 a.m. and what Eastern time, 8 a.m. Houston time, and from what we're hearing from our eyewitnesses who are phoning in, that they heard the booms and the explosion about the time, almost to the minute, of losing contact. It makes you think that perhaps whatever happened very suddenly, and it was very violent, and it was all over.
Right. And after the Challenger blew up in 1986, of course, the space shuttle program was shut down for more than 2 years, at least 2 years, as they tried to go over every facet of the program and figure out what happened. They shut down the shuttle program, and then they instituted some new safety designs, and they were very, very extensive in the shuttles since then. Of course, Columbia is one of the older shuttles, but what they did on the newer shuttles was to put in certain escape hatches, and I don't know for certain whether Columbia was equipped with an escape hatch in terms of if there was an emergency, the astronauts could get out of the space shuttle either on ascent going up or descent coming down. But of course, in a situation like this, if it was a catastrophic explosion in midair, which it appears to be, there may not have been time for anyone to escape from this. And we do not have any indication, once again, what the cause is this morning. All we know is that the shuttle Columbia blew up in midair and pieces of debris rained down on the earth in North Texas and East Louisiana this morning.
The shuttle program has been in effect for 22 years. It was the 28th flight for Columbia, and Columbia is the first. It is the oldest of NASA's shuttles. It was the 113th flight in the shuttle program's 22-year history. Again, the 28th flight for Columbia. And Tom, I know you remember it. I remember it very well. The very first time a shuttle was launched, and it was Columbia, and there's just a terrible irony in all of that.
And NASA is promising to give us a live news briefing, and we're waiting for that right now. We're probably just a couple of minutes away. They had scheduled for 10:30 Houston time this morning from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, or perhaps from the Johnson Space Center in Florida. We're still waiting to hear. Again, if you are just getting up on the Saturday morning, these are the pictures of those smoke trails that a photographer took over North Texas this morning as the shuttle Columbia apparently blew up in midair. Security is very tight at the Johnson Space Center and the Kennedy Space Center, not only this morning after the flight, but since the flight began and for weeks before, for a number of reasons. One, because they worried about a terrorist attack ever since 9/11. But number two, the first Israeli to fly in space is aboard this flight. Ilan Ramon is a colonel in the Israeli Air Force. He is a very much celebrated fighter pilot in Israel. This was a very big day for Israel and Jews around the world. His mother, his grandmother were both survivors of Auschwitz, and he was a celebrated fighter pilot. And his father was actually waiting in Israel this morning to go live on television and talk about his son's triumph. And then he was quickly whisked away when they discovered that something indeed had happened to
Ramon
Columbia.
has a wife and 4 children, and it's our understanding that they were planning a celebration here in Houston with the Israeli community as well as the Jewish community. A big celebration tonight upon the successful completion of the mission, as well as at the end of the Jewish Sabbath, which is currently underway.
We heard from Jeff Ealing at the Johnson Space Center this morning, where they are just literally stunned. In fact, we are all stunned here as we talk about this shuttle disaster once again, the second one in 17 years. The Clear Lake area, as Jeff clearly pointed out, is like one big family for NASA because the astronauts live there. They train there. People in the neighborhoods are friends with the astronauts. They see them at the grocery stores or at churches. So they are neighbors to people in the Clear Lake area. And of course, as we have said, and it happened before the shuttle Challenger blew up in 1986, we had become accustomed to these space flights. In fact, it seemed sort of routine. In fact, people thought, well, there goes another flight of the shuttle, and we were glad it launched, and we paid attention to it when we came back down to Earth.
But certainly over the course of the program, and certainly as we saw the end of the Cold War era, it has become very much an international proposition. And as we were talking about having an Israeli aboard, Kalpana Chawla, an American of native Indian, and people in India were celebrating her. She's a great hero there, and newspapers had put their picture on the front pages to celebrate her homecoming. People in her hometown in India were planning a celebration. Children had gathered at a school that she once attended, and now, according to the principal at that school, everyone has just become filled with disbelief, shock, And of course, condolences. Now, this is very much an international story, even though we here in Houston feel like it's something that's happening as it is in our own backyard.
Once again, 7 astronauts on board. Only 2 of them had previous spaceflight experience. You're looking at the crew of STS-107, the flight of Columbia this week. We can quickly run down who those astronauts were. The commander was Rick Husband, 45-year-old Air Force colonel. He is a Texas native from Amarillo. This was his second flight. The payload commander was Michael Anderson. This was also his second flight to space. He was chosen as 1994 as one of only a handful of black astronauts chosen for a space flight on the shuttles. He had traveled to Russia's Mir space station in 1998. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. He's from Spokane, Washington. And then, of course, we said the other Texan on board was the pilot, 41-year-old Willie McCool, a Navy commander from Lubbock, Texas. His first space flight, he was graduated from astronaut training school in 1996.
All right, and we're now, going back to ABC News?
This is the flag flying at half staff. And let's go back to ABC network coverage now, and we'll stay with you after
Another
this.
eyewitness, more of them coming in. Terry Moran, following developments at the White House. Terry, what can you tell us now, and has the president got there yet?